Welcome. Today we are talking about the Cuban defense against the South African Air Force in August 1981, during the Angola War. In August 1981, the South African Defense Force, SAD, launched Operation Protea to target SWAPO's command and logistics bases in southern Angola, specifically around Zangano and Anjiva. These bases were defended by FAPLA, Angolan Armed Forces, with support from Cuban personnel. On August 23, 1981, the South African Air Force, SAF, began its assault. The first targets were the radar and air defense installations in Kahama and Chibemba. Through precision airstrikes, these critical systems were destroyed, rendering the Cuban forces' air defense capabilities ineffective. In Chibemba, a 130mm artillery battery manned by the Angolans was also obliterated. The strike resulted in 4 Angolan fatalities and 4 others wounded. 7 Cuban specialists who were managing the radar systems were also injured. Later that night, a Cuban 57mm anti-aircraft artillery unit, which had previously been stationed near Lubango Airport, was redeployed to Chibemba. Upon arrival after midnight, the Cubans made a critical mistake by positioning the battery in the same location where the 130mm artillery had been destroyed during the initial assault. On August 26, the airstrikes resumed. This time, a full squadron of 7 South African aircraft bombarded Chibemba. The 57mm battery was again targeted. 2 Cuban soldiers sustained injuries, but both survived. That night, the Cuban commanding officer in Angola visited the site and reprimanded the officer who had positioned the artillery in a vulnerable location. A decision was made to relocate the battery to a more defensible position along the Pan-African Highway. However, the South African jets were relentless. On August 28, the airstrikes resumed, with 4 South African aircraft descending on Chibemba. 1 jet flew at low altitude, coming under fire but managing to evade damage. Moments later, 3 more aircraft attacked the command center once again. In the heat of battle, reports emerged from the Cuban soldiers claiming that 1 South African aircraft had been shot down. The pilot was reportedly rescued by helicopter the next day. However, the South African Defense Force never acknowledged the loss. Despite the intense bombardment, the Cuban defenders remained steadfast. Though they had been heavily hit by the South African airstrikes, their determination to hold Chibemba remained unbroken. However, with the loss of air support following the destruction of the radar systems, Cuban ground forces were unable to engage directly with the South African troops and remained on the defensive throughout the operation. Taking advantage of the situation, following the destruction of the radar stations, a mechanized SADF force advanced into Angola and took control of Humbi. The next day, Zangano was captured by a second South African column after brief resistance. The combined forces then moved toward Anjiva. FAPLA forces, fighting without Cuban support, suffered significant losses. Operation Protea, which continued until September 6, 1981, ended in a decisive South African victory. The SADF destroyed numerous SWAPO bases and established a permanent presence in southern Angola. More importantly for the Cubans, the South African forces seized valuable military equipment, much of which was later transferred to UNITA. In the following years, fighting against the strong UNITA forces would become a Cuban nightmare. Continue watching our videos to learn more stories of the Angola War.